Yes.
Hey, George, let me know if you can hear me.
All right. All right. We'll call the Assembly Finance Committee back to order. Yay. That works. That works. Um, let's see. Do we still have our Assembly folks online? Can you hear us okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. We got through roll call. And I believe that there is a motion to amend the agenda. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would ask the body if we could move item 6 to the top of the list. So it would be the first agenda topic above item 2. And I would ask for this consent.
Any objection? All right, so moved. Do I hear a motion to approve the minutes of September 6th? Go ahead.
Madam Chair, I move to approve the minutes of September 6, 2023 with one small edit, which I have provided, and I believe Mr. Kelly has provided to Ms. Spiegel. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? All right, minutes are moved. All right, and we are on to assembly grant process. Ms. Swink. Oh, sorry. Wait, Madam Mayor has something she wants to share.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to thank our Deputy Mayor for doing her first official act today by being at the changing of Seward Street to Heritage Way. And I apologize for my absence. I'm dealing with a little bit of a back spasm today, so I just wanted to thank Ms. Hale for covering for me. Thanks.
Yay, Ms. Hale. Thank you for that. And happy first day of Native American Heritage Month. All right, Ms. Flick.
Excellent. Good evening. We are coming back to the topic of your assembly grant process. We talked about this back in August. And are you guys still getting an echo, or is it okay? Okay. So for purposes of recap, it's been a hot minute since we had this conversation. I'm going to do a quick summary for you. The request was to flesh out the first option, which I'll go through tonight, and then turn it back over for you for your discussion and whatever you all would like to accomplish. So we move on to the next, please. So just to recap our prior conversation, the process in FY24 appeared to be a bit frustrating and a little bit challenging. We had a conversation in August about that process and potential options for you. It was a good time just to talk about it after we finish the cycle, but before we really get into the next cycle. We presented 3 options to you in August as a point of opening a conversation. So obviously there are many things that you can do, but we opened these up for the conversation. The first option was looking at a pre-budget process where we would, as staff, set up something similar to the marine passenger fee process, take in grant applications, go through public comment, and then bring those proposals back to you through the manager's proposed budget. The second option was a post-budget solution whereby through the budget process, you would allocate a certain dollar amount that would go to community grants. And then after the budget cycle, perhaps late June, July, there would be a process for organizations to apply and be awarded from that designated budget line. And then the third option is not to make any changes from the previous process, just kind of continue with our status quo. There were some themes listening back on that discussion. There was a desire for a consolidated list of items to consider and make decisions upon. And there was also a concern about dealing with changes that occurred during the cycle. So a grantee may come in with X dollars and through conversation end up with a different dollar amount. So that was a theme that was brought up. There was a specific request that came out of that August meeting, and that was to notify the organizations who had applied for a grant last budget cycle, let them know that we were having this conversation, that we were looking at different options, And we did that. We had two organizations provide some information back. Those are included in your packet. And so yes, we want to just report back that we did complete that. Before we get into fleshing out option one for you, one of the things that we talked about back in August was perhaps categorizing the types of granting that is done by this body. And so I have a couple of slides breaking out grant recipients. These are our own kind of breakout looking historically at what the Assembly has done through their budget process. We have group consistent grantee or those that are non-competitive grantees. They get ongoing awards generally every year. Better Capital City, which is KTOO and Alaska Committee. Childcare through the AEYC, Douglas 4th of July, the Juneau Economic Development Council, the Juneau Festival Committee, and Parents for a Safe Graduation. Then we have two organizations that really act as a partnering agency for you. They issue grants on your behalf. So they're a conduit agent. We've got the Juneau Arts and Community Council and the Juneau Community Foundation, which handles a lot of your social service grants. You also have a lot of one-time requests for funding. And so last year you had Gavel, Alaska, which specifically requested one-time funding for equipment. Heat Smart, which has been funded for a number of years, but last year was specifically added as a one-time expenditure. Housing First, the Nordic Ski Club, the Rock Dump Climbing Gym, and Sealaska Heritage for their STEAM Fab Lab. We also have organizations that get funding regularly through the marine passenger fee process, and I just wanted to include those on here. The AJ Dock, Downtown Business Association gets some funding here, but also some through the general fund. The Franklin Dock, Tourism Best Management Practices, and then Travel Juneau, which gets some funding out of the marine passenger fee, but also the hotel bed tax. And then finally, at the bottom of the page, just looking historically at some other organizations that have gotten grants. This isn't the full list of everyone every time, but just some representative examples of those who have gotten grants. So I thought I'd start out with, generally speaking, what is status quo? If we're talking about a change, it's good to know kind of where we are. So with the marine passenger fee grants, there is a very defined process resulting in grantees and amounts being included in the manager's proposed budget. There's an advertised period for applications. There's public comment time allotted through an online venue, and the Assembly receives a full packet of all applications and all comments. So you have those for your information and action if required. In the ongoing grants kind of category, the manager includes most of the recurring static requests in their proposed budget. And significant increases or one-time funding asks are generally presented to the AFC along with a recurring request. Typically, we would have the JAC, JDC, JCF, and Travel Juneau present to the Assembly Finance Committee during the budget process. And then other grants come to the Assembly in a lot of different ways. There's no official public announcement of an opportunity for those seeking funding. There's no deadline for making requests. And some of those requesters do make presentations to the AFC. That's just a quick look at where we are. So I'm going to compare that to the option one, and this is from our discussion in August. This is not a conversation about the green passenger fee. There are no changes to that process. There would be a change in the ongoing grants, and that the manager would be directed to review and include those requests from ongoing and partner agencies within the recommended budget proposal. That would include JAC, JDC, JCF, and Travel Juneau. And we would recommend, just from a timeliness perspective, that we have presentations from those organizations, not during the budget cycle, at another time during the year where they can tell you about their program. They can tell you about the good things that they're doing. They can tell you about those trends, but not take up those sunny Wednesdays in April and May when there are a lot of other things that you need to consider. And then with the other grants, we would change that process to mimic the marine passenger fee. So we would have a defined process, have a defined application, advertise the fact that there's an open period for people to submit grant applications, provide a time for public comment online. And again, you would receive all of the grant applications and comments along with those, but the ones that are decided upon through a process we'll talk about in a minute would be included in the manager's proposed budget. So let's talk about the grant application. Oh, let's talk about the timeline. I'm sorry, I'll do one page at a time. So in this scenario, December 1st, the manager would open up community grants application period, similar to the marine passenger fee. Applications would be due at the end of December. The first half of January, the manager and staff would work with applicants to get clarity, refine ideas, fill in holes in applications. And then from January 15th to February 15th, grant requests would be made public and available for public comment. In the February AFC meeting, the manager would present the recommended grantees to the AFC, and then in April you would see the final list with the proposed budget, and then you would also get the full packet, all the applications, all the comments, etc. Talk a little bit about the application. Yes.
Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
Thank you. I'm just trying to, when you talk about grant requests being available for public comment online, and I know you said that's the way it works with the marine passenger fee. Are you saying that the requests are all put out there and then we solicit emails from people? Is that what you mean by available for comment online?
Through the chair,
Yeah, go ahead, Mr.
through the chair. Thank you. Thank you, Deputy Mayor. We haven't sussed out exactly what that public comment period will look like, but the general idea is just what you said, that we would post the the grant requests that we received and solicit feedback from the public on those via some sort of online mechanism. Email might be the best choice. Yeah.
It's like,
Okay, very good. Any other questions on the timeline?
Madam May.
Madam Chair, if we look through the packet, Alaska Heat Smart asked if we did this option, if we could start it before December 1st, just do it being at a holiday month. Is that something you could work into your guys' schedule if we had to start it like on the 15th or something?
It's like,
Absolutely, through the chair. If the assembly decides to go with this type of a grant process, we could notify those who received who applied last year as soon as, sometime this week, that there is going to be a grant period. It's going to be open this time. They could start putting their grant requests together. So we could absolutely get that started and notify people. And certainly in a year of change, there will be people who work within the process, and probably in that first couple weeks of January, we help them refine their application.
any other questions right now? Go ahead, Ms. Hughes-Kanji.
Thanks, Ms. Slick, for the notification you've already done to solicit feedback. And as if we moved it up to say November 15th, we'd also do, I assume, a public relations blast to the same way we do for marine passenger fee, correct? Yeah, thanks.
Yes, through the chair, absolutely. We would find as many ways to advertise that: regular PSAs, Facebook, all of the other mechanisms.
We have a question online, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Also on timeline, in talking with staff, it sounded like if we want to work with this option, we have to make that decision tonight to be able to do this, by December 1st at the latest. Is that correct? That this option in particular would require action now?
Ms. Slick.
Absolutely, through the chair. Ms. Wall, you're right. If this isn't the option that the assembly wants to go with, we do need to get that direction from you tonight so we can start notifying folks. We can build out the website. We can refine the physical application, etc.
And Ms. Wall, you're really quiet online, so I don't know if you can get closer to the mic or something like that. All right, go ahead, Ms. Slick, you can continue.
Excellent. Let's talk about the grant application. Obviously, we'll be looking for the organization's name, a brief description of their purpose, what their request is, what is the funding hoping to accomplish. We'd be looking for them to specify an amount and help us categorize what they're asking, or is it for their ongoing day-to-day operations, or do they have a particular project or piece of equipment, a one-time type request? We would ask them about their other sources of support for this request. What other options do they have? How much could be obtained through those other sources? One of the questions we would ask is, how does the request meet a community need and or align with the Assembly's goals and priorities? We would want them to help us understand the status of the project and the readiness of the project. So is this something that they have a great idea and it's going to take them a while to bring to fruition and actually start spending any of the funds? Is it something like a grant where they need a commitment on a match so they can do a grant application, even though maybe the expenditures may take a year or more to come to fruition? Or is this the kind of project where as soon as they get a green light, they're ready to press the order button and get things going on their project? So just understanding that readiness for the expenditure of funds.
And Mr. Kelly?
So when it comes to the question of how the applicant would support one of our goals or priorities, that's the same goals and priorities that we might be changing on December 2nd, or is that defined elsewhere?
Mr. Barr?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hoggadock. Yes, this would be the Assembly goals and priorities list. We didn't note them here. It's also possible and likely that we would look at other goals and priorities the Assembly has set. The legislative priorities come to mind. But yes, it's true that you will be looking at changing those potentially at the retreat. It's also, I think, generally is the case that while you know, every assembly every year does look at them and analyze them and consider changes, I think it's fair to say that it's been a goal of past assemblies also, particularly for those longer term goals, to continue with those from time to time too.
Okay, keep going, Ms. Flick.
Thank you. And then depending on the requests and the types, the amount that we receive, we may direct applicants to other assembly supported grants, perhaps through the JAC or the JCF, if it's more appropriate based on the request. We may also try to categorize those into major funding expenditures, minor funding expenditures, one-time operate. There's just, depending on what comes in, we may have to kind of group them and think about them in different groups. So I wanted to say that out loud. And certainly staff will work with applicants to ensure clarity and completeness of their application so that it's understood what they're really asking for, and kind of help them think through their request as well.
Excuse Ganji.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just beating a dead horse to make sure I understand. And even those that would be recommended of, hey, maybe this is a Juneau Community Foundation request, those would also be in the list that we got. So we could see that you had recommended that.
For those online, Ms. Flick is nodding her head yes.
Yes, so through the chair, absolutely, you would receive all the applications, and if we did refer those to other sources, we would note that in there.
Great, thank you.
Very good.
Keep going.
So moving on to the next slide, looking at application review, you know, staff would vet those requests against assembly priorities, the legislative priority list, as Mr. Barr has already pointed out, and also the CIP 1% sales tax priorities. How do these requests fit in with those other priorities that exist? Consideration will be given with respect to the organization's ability to obtain other sources of support and the consequences of not funding the request, and also community needs. Public comments obviously would be reviewed and considered. And then requests will have to be included or excluded based on the direction given the manager with respect to the overall budget process during the retreat and the availability of funds. So taking all of that into consideration. And as we've said, as the Assembly Finance Committee, you would receive all of the applicants similar to what you get with the marine passenger fee package, with an outline of, all the applications, the actual applications, additional information that might have been collected, public comments, and any sort of adjudication notes that make sense.
Ms. Hughes Ganges.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry for the questions. So public comments will be reviewed and considered. Is this a situation where potentially we imagine someone submits and tells 500 of their best friends to submit a letter supporting that request, as we already see in other things?
Absolutely, through the chair. Yeah, we
Oh.
we would note those requests and summarize them. If there are volumes of them, provide them to you electronically, probably rather than printed. But yes.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. So that brings us to I wanted to put this back up as a summary. And with that, if there's questions, we can take it. We can take this down and you happy to answer a question.
Okay, is there additional questions, assembly discussion? Go ahead, Ms. Hughes Ganges.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I guess a more general, thank you for that great summary, Ms. Fleck. General question for staff. Oh, and Ms. Wall has her hand up. And this is not just for Ms. Fleck, but also for Ms. Kester and maybe Mr. Barr, but and maybe this strays a little bit into discussion, but I am personally okay with trying this for a year and maybe it'll go great. But I'm wondering how much staff has already, invested some time in fleshing it out for us. I guess if you could speak a little bit to how much staff time you think this will take, or is this, a tremendous staff effort compared to, we already have a sense of how much staff time it takes to do the marine passenger fee this way, but also marine passenger fees are pretty limited in what you can ask for. So if we publicize and we put this out there, is this one of those things where we need to do it for a year to get a sense of how much staff time it takes, or could you speak to that at all?
Go ahead, Ms. Kester.
Thank you. I'll take a stab at that and ask Angie to chime in too. I think that, there is a measurable amount of staff time that this would take. We'd have to have a review committee. We have to come up with the application. It also will require assembly time. And I know that there's really no process that escapes that, but think of a 500-page packet with every single application and every single, correspondence supporting a proposal. And I do think that it's a good way to provide something that's, fair. But I suspect that especially as time grows and that this opportunity becomes kind of more routine, it could become quite an unwieldy process for the assembly to manage. But I'll defer to Angie to talk a little bit more maybe about what her staff would be doing.
Thank you, Ms. Kester. Our finance staff already does spend a bit of time on this process, just coordinating with those who are requesting, collecting presentation information, putting together those for you in a packet, trying to get clarification and answering questions before they even come to you, as you've experienced historically. It is hard to say how much time this would take. It's hard to say how many applicants that we would get. If we get about the same number of applicants, I don't know that it would be, there would be more work, no doubt, but I don't know that it would be insurmountable. So I guess I don't have a great answer for your question until we have the experience. I think also, the outcome will have a lot to do. If there's 500 applications and only 2 ever get funded because of whatever reason, I think we would see those application numbers decrease over time. Whereas if, it's seen as a quick and easy way to get funding for organizations, I would think you would see more and more people apply. So, and it's hard to say how much would be available in any given year as well. So it's just hard to guess without having that process in place.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Miss Wall has a question. Maybe we can close the slide set so that we can see who's online. Okay, nice.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me better now?
Tiny bit.
Okay, I'll just speak up. I definitely have some concerns about this, about option one. One of them being, this is a question, about about not having a funding amount in advance. I think it's not necessarily fair to our applicants, but I'm also curious how this is a question for our manager, how you would go about making a recommendation on who gets funded without knowing how much funding the assembly would want to spend.
Ms. Kester?
I think that the schedule is, I'm gonna let Robert answer that because he actually knows the answer.
Thank you, Chair Wall. Sorry, we're navigating volume dial to deal with our echo situation and be able to hear over Zoom. I think that Ms. Assemblymember Wall is correct. That would be a challenging thing for us to navigate. I think that we would navigate it barring other direction that you may give us. The way that we would navigate it is we would look at what the Assembly funded last year in terms of dollar amount. We would look at any direction that we received from the Assembly at the Assembly retreat. And we would also be weighing what we know at the time of budget development in terms of sales tax and property tax and other revenue projections to have a sense of how the budget is shaping up and where all of our expenses, both Assembly grant expenses and all the other expenses that ultimately roll up into the manager's proposed budget, that is the starting point for the Assembly during the budget process, kind of how all of that is shaping up. And, you know, in a lean budget time, where we were looking at reductions or status quo and not caring for inflation, then I think it is likely that you would see fewer of these in the manager's proposed budget. And I think the converse is likely to be true as well in non-lean budget times. So there's probably more to say there, but we would be looking at the kind of the whole scope of revenues and expenses and what's been changing in our economy and direction that we've received from the Assembly at the retreat and at any other point in developing these.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bryson and then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have two questions. We're trying to correct so that we didn't do what we did last year where we got a partial list of this grant funding and then we were looking at, we didn't have like a complete request. And so I think that's why we're trying to get this. So prior to last year, what was the methodology to get a community group to request funds from the city? And maybe if you could just give us a little bit of history on how we went from a couple of years ago because we tried to get all social services through Juneau Community Foundations, but here we are, we're providing essentially social services to community groups. How did we get there to here? I'll ask that one first and then I'll do my follow-up.
Okay, Mr. Barr.
Through the chair, thank you, Mr. Bryson. It's been a little bit of a mix. I think it is fair to say that there has been no small amount of you know, just knowing that it was the time to start engaging, right? Like if a group got funded in the past and they knew that, you know, the Assembly was starting to consider budget requests and was in the midst of finance time, that they would know to request again. So there was a lot of kind of historical precedent involved in that process. And I don't have a perfect recollection of our process last year, but I know that there was challenges with the process, and assembly desire at one point to attempt to streamline the pending list or the decision list later in the process by deciding earlier that which things would make it up for consideration. That was challenging. So that's not a great answer to your question. It's just I think it's fair to say that historically it's been a little bit of just being in the know, and also a little bit of it just being a kind of not as well defined as it could be process.
I think Ms. McEwen might have some thoughts to share as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
I think they're about to turn up the volume. Try again.
Okay, how is this? Can you hear me okay now?
Yes.
Okay. So historically, the Social Service Advisory Board, and this is going in our Wayback Machine, would review any social services grants, and then that morphed into the Juneau Community Foundation process. Anything that was not one of those social services was generally something that had come from the community by way of a letter to the assembly. The assembly would say, we're not going to take it up at this time. We will consider that during the budget cycle. And the clerk's office would forward that to the necessary staff and finance chair for inclusion in a conversation during the budget cycle. And then those are things such as the Sea Alaska requests for funding for like the Walter Soboleff Center and things such as that. So generally, the grants that are now in the budget have kind of evolved through time. Some of them were, as the deputy manager mentioned earlier, or maybe it was finance director, one of them mentioned that some of these are just standing status quo requests that are happening every year, like the fireworks and the Douglas 4th of July, and some of those things happen annually, and they are put in the manager's budget. But historically, it has been an evolving process, and it has probably been since the Juneau Community Foundation took over the Social Services Advisory Board grants that this conversation has also evolved to where it is today.
Good, Mr. Brayson.
It sounds like we're formalizing the process. I have my follow-up, if I may. And my follow-up is more for our question. Where do we draw the line as we're trying to come up with asking the community to provide or apply for social service and community grants? Do we want to include a criteria of, or is there a criteria to include? I'm thinking of somebody that asked for $500,000 of an idea that might not have been as thoroughly vetted as some of the more shovel-ready projects. So would staff or would the assembly, or can we give direction to staff? Like, how do we figure out what would be appropriate for an assembly grant and what wouldn't be? How would we get that criteria? Maybe that's the best question. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Is that a rhetoric question, or would you like someone to answer that?
If anybody had a direct answer, that would be great. If we need to leave it more rhetorical world, that's fine. That's all we think about it.
Go ahead, Ms. Kester.
Do you believe Ms. Fleck outlined the criteria that we are proposing that would be used for that review process? Assemblymember Wall pointed out that it would be one way to, you have levers, right? You're like, how do we control the potential enormity of this? And imagine, 30 organizations all asking you for really, really good things that you can't possibly afford. And then you are in the painful process, or the manager first, but then of course you, in saying no to, 25 of those organizations. And are we just setting ourselves up for some situation like that that's painful for the assembly and painful for the community? And that's where I think that, you know, the dollar figure would help provide some measure on that, right? Because it would provide some constraints. So I think that's part of Assemblymember Wall's question when she's like, how would you approach this without a dollar figure? And Deputy Manager Barr gave a great answer. It was like, well, we would do the best that we could, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the community would be like, well, I know that they might not have that much because last year they forecast, you know, it would be difficult. So you do potentially have a situation where it's painful for everyone.
Thank you, Ms. Kester. We have Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Hale and Ms. Gladishevsky. Mr. Kelly.
Thanks. I just had a process question. Are we, I noticed that most of the slides, they seem to suggest option 1. Of course, Ms. Flick did send us new assembly members an email, and it's also here in our presentation, or back in, I think, August, when we considered or were presented with 3 possible options. Are those also on the table today, or is that going to be taken up at another time?
Go ahead, Ms. Flick.
Through the chair, Assemblymember Kelly, the direction that we received in August was to flesh out option 1. I don't think that removed anything from the table, but the body desired more information. And so that's where the focus was put.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Go ahead, Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good discussion. I appreciate the depth of the discussion. We have a letter and an email from Alaska Heat Smart and from Travel Juneau, and they have some really good suggestions. Both of them do. Will you be able to look at those suggestions and incorporate them? So, for example, Ms. Perry talks about providing a budget because sometimes people don't, or some people just give like back of the envelope, and Travel Juneau does a detailed budget. And then Alaska Heat Smart also talks about what happens if there's an opportunity for a federal funding that needs a match and it's out of cycle, and are we going to be able to address that? So my first question is, will you be able to incorporate some of these suggestions into your application process?
Through the chair, yes, we will be able to include some of these, perhaps not all of them. I don't know that we would ask every organization for a full-blown budget. Obviously those organizations that have an operational support component, it's good to look at their entire budget. But we would vet, part of the application is what other funding sources do you have, understanding their financial situation. So certainly we would look to include some of their suggestions in there, the ones that are practical that we could include, yes.
Okay, great, thanks. I have another point. I wanted to.
Is it related?
No, but it's part of the conversation that's been going on.
Okay, you want to hold? So Ms. Hughes-Ganges, she's got to leave soon. So
okay,
we want to get her input. Go ahead, Ms. Hughes-Ganges, not Ms. Gladishevsky.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Glad we all clocked that. It was fun. I would have made a motion. Just to get us to discussing. I think Ms. Wall's question hit on. I went actually back into. I rewatched the video tonight before I came because my memory. I needed a refresher on where we left things, and at that time, I think I was maybe the only one who verbally was interested in option 2. And I think we could certainly do a blended version of any of these. I appreciate staff fleshing this out. I think it's kind of one of those things that we could say, let's try it. And that's why I was asking about staff time, see if it's painful. So I'm fine making a motion to say, well, let's give it a go. My fear is, I think the reason that we don't pull things off the marine passenger fee list that the manager makes for us mostly, and I do, and I'm paying every year, is because we know it's such a limited option of things that they could choose, but staff could make us go through this whole process and make us a nice recommendation, and then we might all tear it to shreds, and then it's like, kind of, where did this get us? It still would, I still think it would have gotten us some things that I care about, such as the whole community knowing about it, not just the people who it's their uncle works at the city. Not that the city is like corrupt, but like they know more about the assembly than somebody else does. Or like they come from an organization that's historically gotten funded. So, I mean, that would be a gain to me, that the whole city knows about it. Having some like formalization of where we're getting the same materials from everybody and staff's working with them, that to me would be a gain. So I'm willing to say, I move that we direct staff to go forward with option 1 and make those modifications that were requested, such as moving it earlier. And I'm making the mayor just crack up down there. And with that, I'll stop so we can discuss.
Okay. Madam Mayor? Oh, Ms. Wall. Oh, go ahead, Madam Mayor.
You can go to Ms. Wall first.
Yes, Ms. Wall, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to object. Although I appreciate the spirit of trying things out, I think the damage could be quite substantial if we're not ready. I think grant programs are very complex, and I think there's lots of things staff are going to have to figure out. And some of those things they may not feel comfortable making a decision about. Money, how big of a grant, the exact application of criteria. And I think we could break trust with the public. I think if you are a grantee and you put time into putting together an application, getting people to write in, and then only to find out that the assembly only has, $50,000 that they want to spend, then you're going to feel pretty burned. And so I'm not opposed to thinking about this in the future, but I don't think we're there. I will say, as finance chair, I am committed to, if we go with option 3, I'm committed to working with staff, with the mayor, on improving. I think there are tweaks that we can make to make it more so that we are all on the same page about what we're doing, and that we're more transparent about the public. So it doesn't have to go exactly like it did the last year. I think every year we're learning. And so if we don't move forward with option 1 tonight, I think we can still get better.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Madam Mayor?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would object also, and I appreciate Ms. Huscani's just having a motion to get us chatting. And she actually spoke to 2 of my objections, mainly one, we can all laugh about it, but I don't think this body, and I'm including myself in that body, has the discipline to accept totally the staff's recommendation. And so we'll just be back to option 3 anyway. And the second thing is, I think it will just take a lot of staff time when we know we're going to discuss them all at the assembly level anyway. So, but I don't think that we need to see, and I'll say option 3 also, as the same as it was. We could give people, we could be more public about, this is the time period that you submit requests to the assembly. We could have even, what would you say, a time frame for request submittal or something like that. We could even, staff could still help us out by if someone comes in, and we could say, well, that's a social grant that needs to go to General Community Foundation rather than the assembly. But I just don't see us not coming back, because we're going to get pressured by people for a variety of things. I'll talk about the wrestling mats. And so I'm going to want an avenue to get wrestling mats. Mr. Brightson's going to want an avenue to do something else. And so I think it just takes a lot of staff time for something that I know that we're going to peel off the Band-Aid and dive deep into the cut. So, and also if we just didn't have the money, then it's easier to, again, they're doing a lot of work when we get to the end of our budget and say, oh, we're just down to $1 million. That's not very much money. Anyway, so sorry for the long-winded. I usually am not, but I'll object.
Mr. Kelly and then Ms. Hill.
Thank you. I think I'll object for a few reasons. I'm leaning more towards option 2 myself. I feel like the timing of this of option 1 probably wouldn't be good, especially since we could be revisiting some of our priorities in December. And also we're kind of in a rush to get the news out if we're planning on getting started within a couple weeks. The reason why I favor maybe option 2 instead, I think that would encourage more fiscal responsibility if we during the course of the budget process actually set an amount that we would like to go towards. And then that also I think helps facilitate it with staff. So I will likely be a no vote on this for option 1 and possibly option 2 in the future, or yes, option 2 in the future.
Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate what Madam Mayor has said. I think that I hesitate strongly to put it out to the public that we're seeking these, because without much guidelines, we could be swamped again, and we could, as I believe Ms. Wall said, setting false expectations. I think that there's a lot to work with. And we're being very rushed, and it's no one's fault. We have had a lot of change, and I think I appreciate Ms. Wall's desire to tweak the process, which is exactly what was happening last year. That was Ms. Treem, Chair Treem was trying to change the process, and I appreciate Ms. Wall's desire to do that again, but leave a lot the same in terms of the process. And then during the finance process, we can be talking about this, and we can be letting people know that we're looking at changes, and maybe it's option 2 or some other version of option 3. Thank you.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. I completely agree with you guys. I think what we're trying to do here is finalize or formalize this process, so that way we don't go through what we went last year, and then next year the assembly will have a formalized process how to accept community grant applications, and I think we're on our way to getting there. Thank you for the time.
Anyone else? All right, go ahead. Did you want to say something, Ms. Candy?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just I appreciate everyone's thoughtful comments and look forward to better and improved option 3 this year. But I mean, we can still vote. I'm just sharing that comment. But I'll also be voting no. I just wanted to get us going.
All right, we have go ahead, Madam Mayor.
If the maker of the motion is going to vote no, I would ask her to remove her motion, and I would make a motion for her.
Happy to do so. It's just trying to move things along. I remove my motion.
Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I would move that we thank you to the staff for your hard work on option 1, but I would move that forward option 3, which is the status quo, and allow our finance chair to try and tweak things. And Ms. Treem tried to tweak things. Communication was a bit of a problem last year, and hopefully Ms. Wall will figure out the communication a little bit better to all of us, so we know a little bit more what's going on those sunny Wednesday nights. So that's my motion.
Any objection? Okay, go ahead, Mr. Kelly.
I think I already spoke to my objections on the previous motion.
Okay, we have a motion and an objection. Can we get a roll call?
Thank you, Chair Wahal-Gadak. Assemblymember Hughes Candies.
No.
Chair Wahal-Gadak, would you like me to clarify the motion?
Please.
On the motion to forward option 3, which is status quo, and allow the finance chair to tweak and improve the process. Assemblymember Hale.
Yes.
Apologies. I already have Ms. Hughes Candy's vote as no. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly.
No.
Assemblymember Atkinson.
Yes.
Assemblymember Bryson.
Yes.
Assemblymember Wall.
Yes.
Mayor Walden.
Yes.
Chair Wahal-Gadak.
Yes.
Motion passes. 6 ayes, 2 nays.
Correct.
Assemblymember Hill, did you vote yes?
Yes.
Thank you for the correction.
Okay, we ready to move over to JDC/COVID small business loans update? Miss Flick.
Thank you. This is an informational item just to follow up. Can we turn that down just a little bit? Thank you. In your packet on page 7 is just a quick memo. During COVID, you partnered with JDC to provide a small business emergency loan program. There were 173 loans originally approved. And that was a really important program. It was well received by the community. And we have a great business community. 148 of those loans have been paid in full. We, through JDC, lended out $3 million. $2,738,000 have been repaid, which far exceeded the expectations looking back at the minutes of when this program was put into place. So I think it's a true success story for the assembly, for the city, for JDC, and definitely made a difference for these organizations. As with any loan program, there is going to be a certain percentage that don't have great results. Right now, we have 5 loans sitting with JDC where the borrowers have been completely unresponsive. And so in accordance with the resolution that was passed to create this program, the city is going to take back those 5 loans, get them off of JDC's books, bring them over onto CBJ as individual loans due back to us. And that amounts to $98,462.77 in principal. And then we will use the tools in the city's toolbox to go about doing collections on those. The program that
Miss
or-
Flick, Mr. Bryson has a question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Flick, of those 5 businesses, are they still in business or are they not conducting business anymore? Do we have that information?
through the chair, I believe 2 of them are no longer in business. The other 3 are.
Thank you.
Absolutely. With our resolution with JDC, their program, the resolution was set to sunset December 31st of this calendar year. So we will work with them to essentially take back all of the outstanding debt at that time and work through our collection mechanism, with the exception of they have a handful of businesses that are on an auto pay program and they're making progress, and we're not going to mess with that. We're going to leave that in place. JEDC reports quarterly to us on their collections. They remit those loan repayments back to us. So I just wanted to make you aware of the 5 that we're taking back now. And then in December, it doesn't require assembly action. It's just an administrative function where we'll take those off of JEDC books and bring them back onto ours with those exceptions that are actively repaying. Any questions?
Questions? Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I actually don't have a question. I just want to, I'm just going to bring us back to that very uncertain time, very early in the beginning, and just want to thank the assembly for taking a leap of faith on the business community and granting those loans because they were a big difference. Get a motion on that one and thank JEDC for doing all their good work.
Go ahead, Ms. Flick.
Excellent. JDC has definitely been a great partner. So if there's no other comments on that, do you want to move to the next item?
We good? Yeah, move to update to purchasing code.
Excellent. So on page 8 of your packet, there's a memo explaining the proposed updates to the purchasing code. This is a project that many of you are familiar with because it started almost a year ago. We could have had this meeting tomorrow. We could have said, we talked about this a year ago. Jeff Rogers worked with you. His memo is included in here, so you have the context for that. Essentially, the purpose of the amendments presented to you are to gain some clarity, to increase some efficiency, but still allow for a competitive process. And, just doing some streamlining for the provision of capital or of city services and contracts. So there is one typographical error on section 2. It calls out it's code 53.50-020. It's actually 010 is the definitions. And so we will correct that administratively, but I wanted you to be aware of that in your actual code documentation. We've added some definitions for breaking out a formal competitive sealed bid versus an informal public solicitation, versus a written quote or written proposal. The other thing that we did, just to make it a little more clear, is we called out that public notice does not require local newspaper advertising, since we only get a printed local newspaper twice a week. There are other mechanisms to get solicitations out into the public. So just a little reorganization with that. The other changes that are made in section 3, breaking out for contracts, purchasing methods that are between 5,000 and 25,000, requiring 3 quotations rather than a formal competitive sealed process. So you can go out and get quotes for the things that you need to purchase. Greater than $25,000, but not more than 50,000, would be made through some open market informal public solicitation with 3 quotes. So again, not going through a sealed competitive bid process. And then the last thing is requirement for public notice for contracts. Just fixing that public notice piece. In professional services, it follows the same kind of cadence. So for contracts, professional service contracts between 5,000 and 25,000, you need 3 proposals. Similarly, those from 25,000 to 50,000 can be made through an open market solicitation, 3 proposals, and then clarifying the competitive sealed nature of procurements over 50,000. Section 4 has the clarification of public opening of bids rather than requiring the opening to be in person. Back in the day, you called everybody to a location and somebody brought in the envelopes and opened the solicitations in public, and everybody gathered in a room. Today, we open a Zoom and do that still publicly, but not physically in public. So just, it's a little nuanced, but we wanted to modernize the code just a touch with that little change. And then recognizing the value of the dollar has changed over time, increasing the threshold for assembly approval, capital improvement project bid awards from $1 million to $1.5 million, and for contracts for operational bid awards from 100,000 to $1 million. And lastly, in section 5, we were looking to narrow some sections of the exemption areas such that they weren't overused, that we could keep the competitive process, but there are valid reasons to use some of the exemptions, which is why we added the last, which would be section Q, sorry, that add the purchasing exemption for situations where the manager determines a non-competitive purchasing to be in the best interest. And so that because we're narrowing down other sections, providing that manager's ability to provide the exception on the front end of a procurement rather than using an exception and finding out later. So that's what that last section is about. And that's a quick overview of the changes there. And I know that we've gotten, staff have gotten quite a few questions and comments. So I'm sure that there's discussion to be had.
Mayor Weldon.
Thank you. And I talked to Ms. Flick today and thank you for pointing out the difference between in public and publicly, because that was one of my questions. My second question was, I asked her on page 6 of 8 of the ordinance, or page 15 of the packet, maybe 15, on line 23 for the bids in excess of $1 million, as opposed to $100,000. And that just seemed like a big jump to me. And I just wanted her to speak to that publicly.
Go ahead, Ms. Flick.
Thank you, through the chair. So this is really in response to looking at other communities and the value of the dollar. And in particular, when we're talking about competitive bids, you're talking about typically construction projects that are fairly large. And so I think you would see the big projects that you would want to weigh in and approve, and the smaller items, which just with inflation and the cost of things, there's a lot of work that's done under $1 million. That's definitely, you know, I don't know what else to say other than that. $100,000 doesn't buy what it used to. And so that's really the goal of that, is to get the things that are pertinent in front of you, and the things that are not as large in today's dollars, not taking up your time.
Mr. Kelly.
Just to follow up on the mayor's question, would you be able to give an example, perhaps, of one of the types of projects that would be I guess, in excess of them, I guess, that you're speaking to? That
Through the chair, I don't have a specific recent procurement, but if we're talking about needing to do a whole bunch of a new stretch of road work, you're bidding that out. You would go through a competitive bid process. If you're doing a really large section of road, it would easily be over $1 million. You'd be seeing that. If it's a smaller section, it may only be 750,000. I'm making up numbers. I haven't looked at those contracts lately. Maybe Ms. Custer can provide some better examples, but they're going through a competitive process. It's just what needs to come before the assembly.
I guess what I'm more familiar with as your former engineering and public works director is bids for public improvement contracts. And that's where you're changing it from $1 million. So anything over $1 million right now goes to the assembly, and that's why you have the bid awards section in your packet. And we're asking that to go to $1.5 million. So for example, if a roof costs if a roof would cost $1 million, we wouldn't bring it to you, but the JPD roof that costs $1.85 million, we would still bring that to you. Contracts are a different type of procurement that is managed through purchasing, and they are for goods and services. So can someone help me think of a good example of a good or service that would be awarded by contract versus a public improvement contract? Software. Okay, so there's a service. Salt delivery. That's something. Janitorial contracts, to repeat my phone of friends here.
Mr. Brayson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was going to go with continue on with the road analogy to help drive us through this discussion. So yes, if we're deciding the policy of a road and we're making $1 million decisions, that's policy. We want that on our level. If we have a pothole to fix, we want the city manager to have that level of, maybe not a pothole might not be the exact right service that we're trying to get her authorization to be able to do, but we'd want her to have the authority to fix that pothole without coming back to us. They're not asking us for a giant project. They're asking us for common sense ruling on smaller purchases, is how I've interpreted this discussion. Thank you for the time, Madam Chair.
Madam Mayor.
Sorry, I have another question too. Question, Mr. Bryson, I have a question. And it has to do with the last line on 7 of 8, for the purchase of any goods or service upon a written finding by the manager. The competitive purchasing would not be practical based on cost, timing, and other relevant criteria. And like I said, I talked to Ms. Flick and Ms. Kester on this. I don't want to do every MR, I think that's what they're called, but when they get to be high priced, where do we have a dollar threshold? And I know we do something similar with an emergency declaration. The manager can go forth and spend money and then come back to the assembly.
What's an MR?
Managers, whatever.
Modification request.
Modification request. Thank you. Anyway, could you speak to that, please?
Mr. Barr.
Through the chair. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So a modification waiver request is a form that we use whenever a department is not using the competitive purchasing process. So examples of when a department might not use that, it's all per code, right? And there are things like if we're needing to procure a good or a service that is only sold by one vendor, as an example, or if we're needing to procure a good or a service for which there is no substitute. A good example of that that just comes to mind is the airport needs very specific road salt for its runway for lots of good reasons that Patty would love to talk to you about. She thoroughly enjoys that. And other examples would be if another governmental agency already has already done the work of competitive solicitation, and we can ride that contract. And then there's all these other categories in 5350-090 that list the different exemptions that by code departments can use. So the mayor is probably going to eventually tell me once I stop talking that I'm not answering her specific question, which I'm going to attempt to do. As I want to just note that there's, as Ms. Flick mentioned, there's these two exemptions, A and J, that we are wanting to narrow. And I could talk specifically about those, but that's the reason why we included Q in this. I was the one that asked Q to be added here specifically because of J, although it's applicable to A as well, because J is very broad, right? It used to say, or it currently says it exempts us from the purchasing code when we're purchasing electronic data processing software and hardware. It's really old language. And it was a very large catch-all that allowed many things to be exempted from the competitive process. And so we narrowed that. But there are times, and specifically with JPD, CCFR, and the utility, where they are procuring sensitive hardware and software systems that we want to be able, via manager's best interest finding or some other means, it doesn't necessarily have to be this, but that's the idea we came up with, to still enable that exemption. I think so. I think your specific question was, if I haven't answered it already, the one part of it that I'm still remembering is about specific dollar thresholds, right? And we're constrained by that in a couple of ways. One by simple budget appropriation authority. If we don't have the authority, we can't purchase what is being sought. And then I might look to either Ms. Flick or Mr. Palmer for a head nod on this, but I think another way we're constrained by that is by the dollar amounts in section under 5350-060 for what used to be, or what is currently 100,000 and what would be $1 million. I think that is accurate. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. yes, you took you a while to get to this. My question, so could we bring up the attorney just to, that's what my question was, where are the sidebars of these? But thank you for the explanation of what a modified request are.
Mr. Palmer. Maybe you can borrow. We have extras.
And if Mr. Barr is right, you could just say what he said, but just to be clear that there are sidebars to this and it's not a free for all for the city manager.
20 seconds. He's right. And then I just want to introduce Nicole Lynch, one of the civil attorneys in the office. She has been working on this ordinance with the finance staff and the manager's office for a while, but we're here to answer any questions.
Oh, perfect then. Can we have Ms. Lynch explain my sidebars? The chair, of course.
I'll take that one. So Mr. Barr nailed it. You have two sets of sidebars with monetary caps on them right now. One is the contract threshold on page 6, bottom page 6 that you just discussed. And then you also have the budgetary constraint that Mr. Barr identified earlier. So those are the two constraints you have. You can add more process if you want, if you need to, but those are the constraints that exist.
Mr. Kelly.
Would now be an appropriate time to make a motion.
Let's see if there's any additional questions. Well, looks like it is.
All right. I move that we pass ordinance 2022-60, and I object for the purposes of offering an amendment.
Okay.
Can I assist?
Yes.
Okay, remember, we're in finance, so we're gonna move it to the assembly.
Okay.
There you go.
Thank you.
Go ahead, get used to it.
All right, I appreciate it. So yeah, amending my motion to say I move ordinance 2022-60 to the assembly, and I object for the purpose of offering an amendment.
Go ahead with your amendment, Mr. Kelly.
I passed this out to those of you in the room. I move amendment. I think I'm going to start actually with amendment number 2. So
Just to
so
interrupt
this
you,
is
is there a way
number
we
one,
can-
but it's titled amendment number 2 on our sheets. Can we pause for just a minute? I think we need to text this to the ladies online. We'll take a minute at ease while we do that.
I did, thank you. And I just emailed it to our 2 members online.
You ladies have them? If I can just get a thumbs up and we can continue. Okay. So we're going to start with amendment number 2, which is actually the first amendment.
Thank you. I move to amend ordinance 2022-60 as follows: to require an assembly ratification process of the manager folks proposed CBJ 50.50.090Q except competitive solicitation process. It would read as follows: to add the following in italics line at the end of section 5Q. To the purchase of any goods or services upon written finding by the manager that competitive purchasing would not be practicable based on cost and other criteria. Notice of the written finding and authorization shall be prominently posted in a public place at the offices of the purchasing office.
Madam Mayor.
I'd object for purpose of the question, and there's some confusion of the number, but I think he's talking about the one in the second half of the page. So, do you have notices now? I can't imagine for every little modified request that you notify the public for that. So that's my question.
So, through the chair, no, we do not. And there are some procurements that we believe would compromise, could possibly compromise the integrity of some of our services if we did notify good good examples would be at JPD or CCFR. The utility, for example, has a proprietary software. I mean, we're perennially worried about someone breaking into the utility and, I shouldn't even say it out loud. They would be like, so we have lots of systems in place to try to protect our data basically from and those types of procurements. It would be difficult. That being said, the MR is a public document, so it can be requested.
Follow up, Madam Mayor?
With that being said, I would keep my objection, and if I can, can I speak to it?
Yes.
Beside what Ms. Kester said, again, these MRs, they do it for a whole bunch of different things, and we don't need to burden staff, I don't think, to post every single one of them, because that's not the case, and obviously there's reasons not to post it.
Ms. Wall and then Mr. Brace.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would just, this question is for the maker of the motion. Can you just speak to the why, what is your intent here?
It feels like, just in reading the text of the motion, that it does kind of offer an out to the standard procurement process. I believe there are some times when that is warranted. And while I personally, I've worked with Ms. Kester for a while, I used to serve with her when I was serving on the school board. But I think it's important to have a little bit of a check, like if there is a certain circumstance where the manager feels that they need to go around the standard procurement process, that the assembly should have a check on that authority, and that it should be in the public knowledge.
Mr. Brace.
Thank you. I'm also going to object to this. While I don't want to take away from the public process or imply that we don't tell the public as much stuff as we can possibly tell them, there's a reason why it's at such low dollar figures. I'd hate to slow down staff, create more work for the assembly, create more work for the staff for what seems like common practice, looking at some of our similar cities across Alaska. Could I ask, I think maybe the same question, but just a little differently. So we know that there's some implications for some of the city proprietary information, but what are some of the other implications for the manager's office if everything under $50,000 has to have this finding posted?
Just so I'm clear, the amendment, because we did just receive this amendment with all of you, I think that the intention of the amendment would be for any good or service. So anything between the 50,000 and the $1 million, if this ordinance passes, would require that the manager issued approved a modification request would have to be posted in a public place. So, and you're asking what's the burden of that. So you've understood, the first part was, these are the concerns that we have with that. I guess the second part, the burden of that is, we probably approve, I don't know, a handful of these in any given month, anywhere from like probably 3 to 10 in any given month, often for very routine things, the salt, chemicals, software, those types of things. So I really think that it's another layer of bureaucracy. I mean, we're posted on a website, and then, who's visiting that website. And so I think trying to tease out the why is really important. And if the assembly does want to restrict manager authority for these purchases, I think giving us some of that direction so that we can work together with you on ways to restrict it that are that are practical would be something that we'd be happy to do. So I guess that would be, if there is that wish to kind of curtail that authority, that would be my request.
Mr. Kelly?
So this is an authority that's already being practiced at the moment.
Correct.
Okay, are we ready for the vote? Okay, Ms. Spiegel?
Thank you, Chair Wahal Gadak. We have an original motion to forward ordinance 2022-60 to the Assembly with an objection for the purpose to amend it as outlined in amendment number 2 on your supplemental document.
Would I be able to withdraw at this time?
You can withdraw anytime you, okay,
There's no objection.
you're gonna object to the withdrawal?
I was gonna offer another amendment.
Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I think something that kind of gets to Mr. Kelly's, and I appreciate the fact that you're brave and offered an amendment, but I think something that gets to it and alleviates a little bit. My concern too is on page 6 of 8 of the ordinance, page 15 in the packet, on line 23, it says 1 for bids in excess of $100,000 for contracts. Instead of the 1 million, I would like to change that to 500,000. And I think that kind of helps keep the public abreast of something and adds a little bit of the sidebar that I was looking for in the other one. And your chart of different cities didn't approach that one. So I'm just going to go out there. I have a little easier time going from 1 million to 1.5 for public improvement contracts. We all know those are getting very expenditure, but for the other contracts, I would like to see us have a little bit more knowledge of. So my amendment again is switching the $1 million that was the proposal to 500,000.
Any objection? Go ahead, Ms. Wall. Did you want to speak to your objection?
Yeah, I'll object. I just think it's, we're getting this because staff could benefit from more authority. And so I'm supportive of the original version of this.
Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to speak in support of Ms. Wall's objection. We know our staff, dot all the i's and cross all the t's, and they do a very good job, and they have a record of all of these things. And if they come to us with this request, I fully support what Ms. Wall has said. This is not a trivial request. What we don't know is when that 100,000 was put in place and how long it's been there and how much costs have inflated since then. So I agree. I'll also object.
Okay. All right, Ms. Spiegel, if you would call the roll.
Thank you. On the amendment to change on page 6 of 8 of the ordinance, section E1, $1 million to $500,000. Mayor Weldon.
Yes.
Assemblymember Wall.
No.
Assemblymember Kelly.
Yes.
Assemblymember Hale.
No.
Assemblymember Atkinson. Assemblymember Atkinson, can you repeat yourself, please?
No. I mean, yes, I can, but no.
Assemblymember Bryson.
Yes.
Chair Wahal Gadak.
Yes.
Motion fails for a 3 nays.
Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
I'll offer another amendment. Same thing, except $750,000. I'm just reminding people that letting people spend $1 million without having the assembly look at it is interesting thought. That's all I want to say. And like I said, I'm trying to support Mr. Kelly's motion in spirit. So that would just bring it to the public.
Any objection? Ms. Wall? Is it the same as before? Okay. We can get a roll call.
On The amendment to change page 6 of 8 of the ordinance, section E1 from $1 million to $750,000. Mayor Weldon,
Yes.
Assemblymember Atkinson,
No.
Assemblymember Bryson,
Yes.
Assemblymember Kelly,
Yes.
Assemblymember Hale,
Yes.
Assemblymember Wall,
No.
Chair Wahal-Gadak.
Yes.
Motion passes 5 ayes, 2 nays.
Any additional amendments? Okay, we're back to the original motion, which I don't believe we had any objections to. As amended. Okay. Motion passes. That ordinance passes, excuse me, to the full assembly for consideration. And I believe, do we need a break or are we good to push through the tax update? You want a break? Okay, we'll take a break for 5 minutes. Quarter 4 tax update. Tax update. Trying to go too fast. Ms. Flick.
Thank you. This update is being brought to you because in May, Jeff Rogers reported at the Assembly Finance Committee that the January, February, March quarter of sales tax return was soft. And there was some uncertainty as to whether we were feeling the impacts of inflation. Was this going to be a trend? Was it something not to worry about? And since he had put that on your radar, I wanted to take this opportunity to say things were good. So we did get what we call the fourth quarter, which is really April, May, and June. So it's the first half of the tourist season. Our annual forecast that Jeff had done for sales tax revenue was 62.2 million. Our actual revenue came in at 63.6 million. So from an annual perspective, we beat our forecast by a little, not by leaps and bounds, but the softness that we saw in that January, February, March period did not persist into the beginning of summer. So it's a good news story. I provided for you in the graphs our sales tax quarter over quarter. Those are in millions. So you can see the blue is FY 2020, the orange is 21, the gray is 22, and then that yellow is FY 23. Next to that graph is the annual amount. You'll see the dollars. So 47 million in FY 20, 39.1 in FY 21, 49.4 in 22, and then our actual of 63.6 compared to our forecast of 62.6 million. And then it's great talking about things quarter over quarter, but given the pandemic and the fact that our summer season spans fiscal years, I just made a line graph for you at the bottom. Just it made more sense in my brain to kind of see this is where we were at the start of FY 20, which was really summer of 2019. So we didn't even know how to spell COVID. We had a great summer, and then in the winter we experienced COVID. We had the summer that was not awesome. So you can just see that just from a linear perspective. So that's why that graph is there on the bottom. So there's sales tax, and then I can flip to the other side. We can take sales tax questions first if you like.
Go ahead, Ms. Hale.
It's actually not a question. Thank you, Ms. Flick. I just, if you are in touch with Mr. Rogers, I kind of hammered on him year after year after year because his estimates were always so low and the actuals came in so high. And so he really nailed it in FY 23. And I also want to commend you on your use of color in these graphs because Mr. Rogers got us used to that and we like it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. And I will definitely convey to Mr. Rogers his success on this forecast.
Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
So if I have this right, we have an extra $1.4 million in sales tax that we could probably put for the Affordable Housing Fund. Is that correct?
So moving on to page 19, you'll see our other, what I call sales related forecast, right? So in our sales tax, we also have a portion of our sales tax that's collected through the remote sellers sales tax commission. That wonderful group that has a long acronym name collects on our behalf. And that has really grown over time. That's the blue portion of the block. So what I did in this particular graph was just stacked. So tobacco is the yellow at the bottom. It has remained consistent over time. In FY20, it was 2.7 million. Last year was 2.8 million, almost 2.9. Marijuana has stayed kind of level, grew just a little bit. The liquor tax has grown from 20 at 950,000 to 1.24 million this summer or through FY23. The hotel bed tax, which we've spent a lot of time talking about, you can see was strong in FY20, came down in FY21, which would be expected with the pandemic, and then has come back strong. And then the remote sellers has really taken off, which is partly because that commission has done a great job of getting vendors to participate and getting clarity on sales tax codes. So they're just becoming more effective, and we've got the right organizations are playing and remitting their sales tax appropriately. So we are seeing the benefit of that over time. So just while we're in the sales tax topic, I wanted to give you the other sales related type taxes for FY23.
Go ahead, Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Where are we at with Google?
So through the chair, Google is that is going to go through the Remote Sellers Commission. It is an ongoing conversation, but they are still working that.
Go ahead, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. I would expect the marijuana tax to grow, but it's not. Just because we've had additional retailers, and any idea why that hasn't increased at all?
Through the chair, Mayor Weldon, I don't know. What I have heard from other organizations when this particular tax is talked about, it's really just hard to predict what those revenues are going to be.
We have Ms. Wall, and then back to you, Ms. Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Curious, you said that the total amount didn't include remote sales tax. Did we when it came to remote sales tax and these other taxes, were we on target? Did they come in above target? You know how much total we were above our budget?
We have folks grabbing their budget book.
Through the chair, Ms. Wall, I might make this a teaser for the November 29th meeting where we'll do an FY23 summary and talk about budget to actual. I don't have those numbers off the top of my head for these particular taxes.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Mayor, I might offer some insight onto alcohol and marijuana. While sales tax did grow in marijuana, I would suspect that the units sold remain the same, so that we sold the exact same number of beer bottles and the exact same number of alcohol bottles, but because of inflation, that's why we're collecting an increase in liquor tax as just one of the costs that would go up. And then with marijuana, it doesn't surprise me if 20% of the population smokes, then 20% of the population smokes. And unless we're trying to increase our number of marijuana users, then we're probably going to have flat marijuana sales, with the one exception, if we made it easier for tourists to be able to imbibe while they're in town, would be one way that we could grow our marijuana tax. So I have a feeling we have the drinkers and we have the smokers, and we're not growing those numbers, is why those numbers are flat, Madam Mayor.
Good question, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hill and then Mr. Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I was just wondering if the tobacco tax includes vape products. I know that Representative Hannan had actually tried to subject vape products to the tax, but I don't know. I think that was not successful, and I just am wondering if those are included.
Through the chair, I will have to take that as homework unless somebody else knows the answer to that question.
Mr. Bryson might know.
I believe I have that answer. When we had this discussion, we included language that any type of smoking device, but it might have been for marijuana. But when we were having a discussion about smoking, there was a line like I asked for whatever the next iteration of smoking device would be. And I don't remember if that was for marijuana or for tobacco as well, but something.
Mr. Kelly.
I was just wondering if you had any idea how much of this growth over the last few years would have to do with inflation, or
Through the chair, Assemblymember Kelly, certainly part of it is going to be due to inflation. These are a percentage of a sale. These taxes are. So as the price increases, the tax will naturally increase. I do think that you're also seeing in FY23 additional, we saw so many more tourists this year, right? So you have more people shopping, more people eating, more people trying the Alaska ales, doing all those things as tourists here. So I think that tourism did have a part to play in our sales, in our liquor tax, in our hotel bed tax, because we had cruise ships, but we also had a lot of independent travelers as well that would contribute to those hotel bed tax and other things. So I think it's a combination. I don't think it's strictly inflation. I think we can isolate inflation when we look at our sales tax, October, November, December, January, February, March, because it's more local consumption of goods as opposed to the other 6 months of the year. We have such an increase of tourists of all varieties.
Absolutely. I think Mr. Barr has follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just looking at our code, the vaping products and e-cigarettes are included in our tobacco tax.
Any final questions? All right, before we adjourn, Mr. Bryson.
This is related to sales tax. Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to maybe poll the assembly before I asked any staff to work on it. When I first joined the assembly, one of my initial ideas was a sales tax holiday. We are coming up in 2024 is a leap year. And I wanted to suggest looking into leap year, February 29th, being a sales tax holiday. I know it has a mixed review from the business community, but there are plenty of cities around the United States that have sales tax holidays. And February 29th would be right before the business community is trying to gear up for the summer. So it'd be a great way to end a tough winter and come out of the pandemic. But if 5 of you really don't like it right now, tell me. But if I could get a friendly nod, and I will begin researching that a little bit. We got a no. I just need 4 friends that think it's an okay idea.
Ms. Hill.
I like it. I didn't initially. I do like it now. But what are the concerns of the business community? Is it like they're the software, automatically computing the tax? Yeah, thanks.
Ms. Wall.
Mr. Bryson, I'm not opposed to the idea, but I wonder whether we could bring it up at the retreat, just recognizing that there's going to be a whole lot of different things that we want staff to focus on this year, and maybe we can all decide together what our priorities are.
Through the chair, Ms. Wool, I was hoping to have a little bit of information so that as we got closer to that time period, we'd have like an ordinance or something, but I knew that we'd have to have one more discussion here, at least in finance. But I didn't want to waste a moment of anybody's time if there was strong opposition to it that I don't really see. I'll go bug somebody this week then. All right. Thank you for that, Madam Chair.
Do we have a motion to adjourn? No. Oh, during the meeting then. We're done.